So we conclude the course with some discussion on the Bhagavad-Gītā, probably India's best known text, certainly as it's been exported since the 20th century, actually end of the 19th century. It's sort of become synonymous with, well, it's kind of like a placeholder for the Bible in Christianity or the Quran in Islam. Now, obviously, it's not the same thing because it's not the one canonical text. Hopefully, you've had a sense that there are many texts, Vedas, Upanishads, epics, Puranas, sutras. But de facto, it's sort of taken that kind of a parallel status. First thing we can mention is it's not a text unto itself. It's been plucked out of the biggest epic in recorded history, the Mahabharata epic. 100,000 verses, just like similar to the verses in the Gita. The Gita has 750 verses, so less than 1%. It's 0.75% of the epic. And it's situated right in the middle of the epic. There's a sort of a battle between two groups of cousins. I encourage you to read the Mahabharata, fantastic story, great tale. If you're looking for something to give some a friend or family member for Christmas, think about the Penguin edition of the Mahabharata by John Smith. I recommend that version. So we have this huge saga, two groups of cousins. They're essentially growing up together in the kingdom. They're the tense sort of rivalry between them. And then there's a gambling match, the famous gambling match. The Pandavas, the 5 Pandava brothers. Arjuna is the middle one. Arjuna receives the Gita from Krishna. They're cheated through dice rolling, weighted dice. Have to fulfill the conditions of the gambling match. To cut a very long, extremely long story, 100,000 verse or 50,000 verse, half of the epic. To cut that extremely long story short, they're exiled for 13 years. They come back, and they come back to claim their rightful throne. They're denied that, and by the conventions of warfare at that day and age, they were duty bound to fight this war by the codes of Dharma. So there's a whole, in the Western intellectual tradition, there's what's called as the righteous war tradition. What constitutes a righteous war? Under what conditions is war or violence rightful, righteous? And so there's a tradition going back to the Romans and through Augustine, actually, who, the great theologian. So if you have a civilization, naturally you have to protect its codes. You have to defend it from attacks. So any civilization has had conditions under which it engages in warfare. And legitimate reasons. In the case of the Indian traditions, that would be dharmic reasons to engage in warfare. So in ancient India was no different. This is not the ahimsa of Patanjali. Non-violence of Patanjali is absolute for all yogis. He says there's no exception. Jati, desha, kala, samaya, anavichinnaha. Sarvabhauma mahavratam, Patanjali says somewhere in the second chapter, around 30s, Sutra 30 to 40, somewhere there. There's no exceptions based on your caste or your country or your time. So that's Patanjalian yoga, in action yoga. The Gita is going to teach us action yoga. And action yoga means doing action in the world, in civic society. So first thing is that if there's a civic society, there can only be a civic society if there's law and order, if there's agreed upon principles that regulate how human beings interact with each other. And there has to be some way of enforcing those, right? If there's no police force, then there's no way there has to be a police force to internally regulate, and there has to be an army to protect the country from pillaging armies. They're going to attack and rape women and kill and plunder and so forth. So there has to be some mechanism to defend against that. So therefore there are dharma codes that regulate when, according to the ideals of the time, to regulate when violence or when the application of force is necessary to protect the citizenry or to protect the country. So according to those codes, we may obviously we have our codes like the Geneva Convention, and we have regulations pertaining to police violence. Obviously, that gets flouted. Obviously, in our present moment, where that's under intense scrutiny. So those codes can change, just like our codes are changing, right? So we're now holding a present moment, holding our police more accountable, and they have to wear body cams and so on and so forth. So our Dharma codes are changing. And as are our notions of what is dharmic warfare. Most people would think the Second World War was dharmic, protecting, fighting against Adolf Hitler. But most people would think perhaps the First Gulf War was not dharmic, that it was really all about oil and capitalist interests. So all of which is to say, there are Dharma conventions. They can be discussed, they can be developed, they can be negotiated, but it'd be hard to argue that there isn't some sort of need for internal regulation and external defense. And if you have doubts about that, just think, well, what if you had a child and someone was going to attack your child and kill your child in front of you? Would you not have a right to exert force against the attacker to protect your child? So if you say yes to that, then you've just agreed upon a legitimate or righteous use of force. So extend that to the country, extend that to civic society, and then you have a discourse of righteous warfare, or the righteous application of himsa, the opposite of ahimsa, non-violence. All that said, this was considered to be a righteous war. Pandavas had to fight it. So the Mahabharata is all about the events that led up to the war. Then the Gita is slipped in right in the middle. So this is kind of like yoga for the warriors, actually. How are you going to catch the attention of the warrior caste? This is not for the Brahmin ascetics in the forest. Well, one way you can catch the attention of the warrior caste is create this fantastic, fabulous epic with the first 50,000 verses are all intrigue and events in the court, in the royal court. Warriors love that kind of stuff. And there are different events that lead to banishment in the forest and various adventures and battles along the way. And finally, this huge battle becomes imminent, battle lines are drawn, and warriors are on the edge of their seats at this point. So whoever wrote the Mahabharata slips in some yoga right at that moment when he's got the warrior's attention. That's how I like to think of it, but that's just, don't take that seriously. That's just my chittavriti, my kalpana, my imagined scenario. So, but we're in the middle of the epic. The first chapter of the Gita is just a Mahabharata, just a list of the names. The blind king, it's all being recited by Sanjaya to the blind king, who's the father of the Kurus, one side, uncle of the other side of the Pandavas. Not an evil king, but a weak king. And weak because he's been partial to his sons, which has caused him to compromise, at least, dharma, in various ways. So battle looms. Krishna is Arjuna's charioteer. And the reason for that is, as the kings are preparing for war, they send their emissaries around to get the various kings of ancient India on their side, one side or the other. And the way the warrior ethic often is played out is that if someone asks you for your help, and you're a warrior, and someone comes and asks for your help, and they ask in a submissive, humble fashion, you just give it. It's just your nature as a warrior. You want to be known as fearless in battle. You want to be known as never turning your back in battle. You want to be known as always keeping your word, by the way. Truthfulness is an absolute requirement for warriors. God knows what they would have thought of our present politicians. But you also want to be known for generosity. So if someone asks for your help, you give it. Some future time you may need that favor returned. So kings will be on one side or the other, not because they were necessarily partial to the cause of not in all instances, in some instances, but not always, the cause of one side or the other, but just because they were asked first. So both sides send their Arjuna goes from behalf of the Pandavas, and Duryodhana himself, the eldest of the 100 cousins on the other side. So we've got 5 cousins on one side, the Pandavas, 100 cousins on the other, the Kurus. They're all brothers, sorry. There's 5 brothers against 100 brothers, but the 2 groups are cousins. They are paternal from the father's side. So the eldest of the 100 brothers on the Kuru side, they call the Kurus. One side is called the Kurus, the other side is called the Pandavas. The 5 brothers are the Pandavas, sons of Pandu. And the 100 are Kurus. Technically, they're all Kurus, actually. But the name Kurus gets applied to the 100 brothers, sons of Dhritarashtra, the blind king. And he's mentioned in the first verse of the Bhagavad-Gītā, so you can check that. He's hearing this, because he's blind, the events of the unfolding war are being recited to him, actually after the war, by his bard. But anyway, how does Krishna get to be Arjuna's charioteer? Going back to that, so Arjuna, middle Pandava, but most famous charismatic warrior of the day, and Duryodhana, eldest of the Kurus, go down to Krishna's kingdom in Dwarka, present-day Gujarat, to request Krishna's assistance on their side. Right, and the thing is, if you get there first and ask, then a warrior has sort of duty bound just to say yes. So they're both rushing to get there first. There's 2 versions of the story. I think one is in the Puranas and one is the Mahabharata, and I may get this slightly wrong, but it's something like this. And the main point is, there's a main point to the story. One version, anyway, they get there when he's asleep, and so Arjuna sits by his feet, of course, indicating his devotional relationship with Krishna. He doesn't assume to sit by his head. He has more of this sort of attitude, even though they're cousins and equals, but he also has more of a devotional regard for Krishna. Sits at the feet, sign of respect. Duryodhana, being proud and arrogant, sits at the head. And when Krishna wakes up, and I think there's 2 versions of the story. One is they get there and he's awake, and he says, "Well, I'll go. Got here at the same time, and I'll go to sleep. Whoever I see first in the morning will get the first choice. What? Why have you come? Ask whatever you will. You'll take it in turns, and whoever I see first will get the first. Will get to ask me, make the first request. Obviously, everybody knows why they're there, but that was the protocol. That's one version. He was awake. The other version, I think he was asleep. It doesn't really matter, because the point is he wakes up and he sees Duryodhana first, and because Duryodhana is sitting by his head. So he says, okay, no, I beg your pardon. He sees Arjuna first. Arjuna is sitting at his feet, so he wakes up, his eyes are looking down towards the end of the bed, and there's Arjuna. So then, forget the details, I might have got a bit wonky on them, but the point is, he says, okay, Arjuna, you get first choice, and so this part holds good. Why are you here? What can I do for you? And of course, Duryodhana is thinking, damn, he's going to ask for the Krishna says, you can either have my army, or you can have me. Okay? That's the deal. And Arjuna, I saw you first, take your pick. Me on your side, but I won't fight. Or you can have my army. He's got a huge army. So Arjuna Krishna sees him first. He gets first pick. Of course, Duryodhana is completely frustrated. Of course, Arjuna's going to take the army. What's the point in taking Krishna? He's not even going to fight. So he can't believe his ears when he hears Arjuna says, Krishna, I'll take you. So Duryodhana is ecstatic at this. He gets the whole army. So he goes off happy. Arjuna is happy because his beloved Bhagavan, Sri Krishna, he ends up being his charioteer. Okay, so that's the background. That's how it's all set up.